Today we have Aditi with us. She is the head of marketing and the co-founder of Mylan Foundry. Previously, Aditi has worked in Tata Group as the senior manager of technology collaborations. She completed her engineering from IIT Guwahati and later went on to pursue MIM from LBS. So, Aditi, how was your journey and how did you enter the field of artificial intelligence as an entrepreneur?
Thanks, Ria, for the introduction. So I have had a pretty interesting journey. Always determined by what seems exciting and the next exciting thing to do. So I did my undergrad, like you mentioned, in IIT Guwahati, electronics engineer. And at some point, I also wanted to understand the world of management. I wanted to understand, because I was, while I'm always passionate about technology, I also wanted to understand how exactly you can, take technology to market. For that, I decided to do my master's in management degree. And then coincidentally, while I was doing my degree in LBS, I happened to, meet Professor Nirmalya Kumar, who was at that time, when I met him, by then he had already moved out of London Business School, and he was basically the head of strategy for Tata Group. And he was looking for someone to join him, to help him with some of the work he was doing in strategy. That's how I came into the Tata Group. And it was an exciting 4.5 years I spent there. First in the team helping in strategy, and then moved to technology and innovation. So at that time, there was so much that I got to understand about new technologies, about what is happening around the world. So I used to lead the university relations program for the Tata Group, where we were investing in a lot of universities globally, the Harvards and the Yales and the Imperials of the world. And at that time, I got to understand what is the future. What are the technologies that would really disrupt the world? And artificial intelligence, of course, has been around for a long time, but in the current format, which is artificial intelligence for video data, voice data, and the ability to do a lot of this on consumer devices is something which is the future. So at that point, me along with my current co-founders, my co-founders are Gopichan Katragadda and Ganesh Suryanarayanan. So Gopi at that time was the CTO of the Tata Group, and Ganesh was another colleague who was part of the same team, the tech innovation team. We decided that we wanted to start a company, which is an Indian company, but a deep tech product company out of India, but which would solve global challenges. That's how we decided to start Mylan Foundry.
So why this name though? Like myelin is a layer around the nerves, right? And foundry
Yes.
is of course a factory. These are two very different terms which are put together. So is there any story behind it?
Yes. So we were always inspired, just like artificial intelligence is actually inspired by human intelligence, especially the more, complex and newer forms of artificial intelligence, such as deep learning or deep neural network, as we call it, is actually inspired by the way the human nervous system works. So since we were inspired by human intelligence, we wanted the company to also have a name that is inspired by that, and hence Mylan and Foundry, because we considered ourselves as a foundry of different technologies with AI as the core, and the ability to build multiple products that would be beneficial to transform the way visual experiences happen and personalization happens, and hence the name Mylan Foundry.
So, Aditi ma'am, great story. It's very honorable to hear it directly from you. So, when you have set up a technology-based company, which is not very common in India. So, what are the problems you faced while setting up this company in India?
Right. So, I think one thing I do want to mention that I think in the recent times, it has become much more easier to set up companies in general. There's a lot more support, not just from the government, but from the ecosystem. I think even personally, right? I mean, 10 years back, it's so much tougher for a person to just decide to quit a well-paying, secure job and start up. But today, because of the ample knowledge around, even our parents are more, warm towards the idea of us deciding to quit our, corporate jobs and start something. I think the challenge of a technology company in India is that often a lot of companies in India are not really ready to try on new technologies. a lot of industries are not mature enough or are, not ready to take the amount of risk. They're a little bit risk averse. Typically, India is a great place to try out B2C operations companies because it has so much scale in terms of B2C. Any company, you want to start a food delivery company, you want to start a e-com company, it's a great place to start because there's so much scale. But the issue with a technology company, especially a B2B technology company, more than issue, the initial challenge is to be able to have those early adopters. Companies, because if you are selling to Indian companies, the ability to convince them that they should be taking that early bet, that they should be looking at disruptive technologies rather than just following what, let's say, what the American companies are doing or what the global companies are doing. I think that's one big challenge. If you are an Indian company selling to Indian corporates, of course, there are a lot of Indian technology companies that have most of their market in the global sort of world. Of course, we also are not just India focused. We are focused globally as well, but we started our validation in the Indian market. I think that's one challenge you typically face if you are, especially if you are a new technology, right? If your core is technology rather than using technology as an enabler, I think that's one challenge that is there.
So like, is the timeline moving according to the plan you have set in the beginning, or like there are any deviations from your original plan?
So I think one common thing across all startups would always be that you have to be agile, you have to be flexible, you have to really go with the flow, right? Because when you start with an idea, you're starting to validate, you don't know all the answers. So while what you will make would be certain, let's say, assumptions on how you would, both from a product development and a go-to-market standpoint, I think as a startup, things always evolve. Because where you start off versus where you'll end up may be vastly different. Because you start with a concept and idea, you started validating, and then you start looking for, a customer who would pay. You start looking for customers who would actually be ready to take that leap of faith and work with you. In that process, I think not just us, any startup will start at some point and it'll evolve. Right? It's always a continuous process. A new insight will result in you maybe adding new dimensions to your product, or even in sometimes pivoting, right? You may start off with thinking that you're entering a value chain from a particular point, but then you realize that there is more value in the other way. So I think the short answer to your question is not always, right? While we are doing well in the general direction of, where we are set out, but there'll always be those little diversions you have to take depending on where the market is leading you.
So I read that Mylan Foundry had received its first funding, started by like $1 million. So
Yes.
how did you land that?
So actually, very, very fortunately, even when we started off our journey, we got a lot of not just support, but a lot of interest from multiple, people, both from the VC world as well as from the angel networks, friends and family, to help support us and basically help us not just from an investment standpoint, but in terms of network and helping us basically identify the right direction to go, mentoring us. So we got a lot of support. So the $1 million was actually a combination of VC funding and funding from friends and family. So our lead investor was Endia Partners. Is Endia Partners rather, and they basically they decided to place their bet on us and help us with the seed round. Their funding was $500,000, and the remaining $500,000 was a bunch of different people who are friends and family and angel investors. We also very recently closed another round of funding, which is again from a family office of Chris Gopalakrishnan. So I think we've been very lucky in that manner versus a lot of other startups where we have been placed with that trust and support. I think it also helps that our team is very experienced and brings in a lot of knowledge in the field of artificial intelligence. So investors are ready to place their trust and bet on us for something where we create longer term value for them.
So Mylan Foundry currently, according to my understanding, offers its products and services to businesses. So do you plan on entering the consumer market, or have you already entered it?
So currently, no. Currently, our focus is B2B. although what we build has an end user impact. So for example, our offerings in the media entertainment space are meant to be, while it is an offering for the media entertainment companies, it is meant to enable the end user to have better viewer experience, to have more personalized outcomes, to be able to actually disrupt the way viewers watch content today, the way viewers engage with content today. So while we in the short and medium term do not have plans to become a B2C company, but we do have quite a significant impact that we will make to the end users, to all viewers across the world.
Aditi, I wanted to
Yes.
know, you have got an amazing team of founders, so you are really blessed in that way, and you have got a very influential type of investors also. But anyway, how did you find it to get your first 5 customers? Was it challenging? Was it easy? Or was it a
Right.
cakewalk?
I would say very, very challenging. I think the reason for that, like I said, is what we are building is very innovative. So,
Yeah.
and the way we are building some of the products, we're looking at the world of video streaming and media entertainment from a different angle. So the biggest challenge in such a case is to even make customers aware, educate them that there can be a solution like this. Versus if it's an existing product and you're building something which exists already in terms of a concept and a product, it's always an easier sell. So I do think that it's been quite a challenging journey, quite exciting, quite, I would say, insightful, because we, for example, for our offerings in media entertainment, we as a team of technologists and product people, we understand AI, we understand video, but it was a process of discovery to understand the market, to understand what is important and what is not, right? So it's been a great, insightful journey, challenging for sure. Currently, we are piloting with some of the biggest players in the country, but to be able to build a credibility, because while you're very right that we've been blessed with a very experienced team, not just the founding team, but also the technical leadership team, the developers, everybody who's in it's a small but very, very impactful team, and we have great investors backing us. It is still important for a new startup, especially in the enterprise B2B space, to build that credibility. For bigger enterprises, for CXOs of bigger enterprises, to take notice, to be ready to trust us with certain things that we're doing, which actually affects what is their bread and butter, right? So I think it's been quite challenging, but quite personally for me, quite a learning experience.
Okay. So currently, are you taking only care of Indian customers, or are you approaching foreign customers also?
Right. So our strategy was to first validate our product with some of the bigger players in India, and then basically go global. We've already started talking to global customers, anywhere where there's video streaming, right? Not just OTT, but education, user-generated content, video conferencing. So we have certain advanced conversations going on. Even game streaming is a space where we have conversations going on with international customers. So while the validation right now, the pilots are ongoing in India, we are also quite aggressively going to look at the American market, the US market, and also the other bigger markets for video streaming very, very soon.
Right. And how competitive is this domain of yours? Like, do you have to compete with some more established companies abroad, or it's still a niche field or a nascent stage?
Right. So I think we decided to take a very blue ocean strategy. We decided to look at how, start with an impact level, right? What is the impact that we can do as a company in the space of video? And we tried to understand the entire thought process, and we brought in what can we as a company bring in as a capability, which is different. So while the space has a lot of players offering, technologies that can help video streaming, can help customer engagement in a certain way, what we bring in is very unique and doesn't exist today as a technology and as a product. The ability to leverage, the consumer's edge device. So today, for example, all of us right now, we are talking on probably either on a laptop or a mobile phone or a PC,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So the edge device is getting more and more powerful today. But while we are consuming content, I mean, in the middle, I couldn't hear Sakshi, for example. So there's always a network dependency, but the edge device is not really used to enable a better experience. The power of the edge device is not being used today. Today, the whole problem of video streaming and OTT is more of a network related problem.
True.
So we are looking at it from an edge perspective. How can we enhance the experience that we are getting today? How can we get better video quality by using the edge device's compute power and using the power of AI? And also, how can we have better personalization? How can we today, for example, when you watch a lot of OTT content, if you're watching an ad-based platform, right? Many of the Indian platforms or even global platforms, when you watch, the ad starts randomly, right? It's not aware of the content. It is not aware whether a particular scene has ended. It is not aware of what you actually want to watch at that point of time, right? So it's not content aware. It is not very, very much device aware. It's also not very context aware. So that's an angle we are bringing in, because we understand video. Our AI engines can train from inside the video, right? It can train from the video and get very powerful insights. So we are using that, angle to enter the industry, which is very, very unique and which doesn't exist today. So to answer your question, overall, there are a lot of players, but the differentiation we have brought in is very, very unique. And we think will disrupt the way the industry looks at content and streaming.
So we often see a few companies failing despite having an amazing idea, maybe because of the lack of resources or the lack of available funds. So what would you suggest to someone facing such kind of a problem?
So I think a very good example right now would be just looking at the COVID scenario, right? There will be a lot of businesses which are doing fantastically well, and then COVID hit. And this is not just for startups, even for very, very big organizations. It has just sent organizations into a tizzy because it's unprecedented. You don't know what is going to happen. You don't know when economy is going to be back. So there'll always be scenarios where a business can fail, whether it be a small startup just starting off, or a mammoth organization which has existed for decades or even sometimes hundreds of years. I think first, just that acceptance is very important, that there will be uncertainty, and you have to often, figure out what is the best way to sail through when there is uncertainty. Even if you have the best team, even if you have the best product, sometimes the market may tank because, your target market that you are, going after may go through a bad phase, right? Your end customers may go through unprecedented times like these. So in such a case, I think the one advice I always have is that you have to be as agile as possible. You have to really pivot when there's a need to pivot. You really have to take hard decisions when there's a need to. But you can't be so stubborn in your ways as a business that you cannot you cannot go through the tough times without drowning, right? Even then, even if you are agile, there are always times that a business can still fail. There can be so many different reasons businesses fail. In which case, I think you just pick yourself up, dust yourself, take those learnings, and move on, right? I think that's the one advice I would like to give anyone, not just for a business, anywhere, right? I mean, all those people who have lost their jobs in the current COVID scenario would be facing a similar crisis situation where they don't know what to do. They've done everything right. They may have been top performers, but they lost their job today. It shouldn't be considered as a failure. It should just be considered as uncertainties that come, right? Just like the market, you can't predict the world, you can't predict the economy, you can't predict market. Even if there are experts doing it, there's no way people predicted COVID, right? So similarly, there are many things that you may not be able to predict. So have that clarity in your mind that there's nothing that cannot fail. There's nothing that's too big to fail. There's nothing that's too perfect to fail. But always put your best foot forward. Always be agile as a team, as individuals, and try to sail through depending on what the situation is. I think that would be my advice.
So, ma'am, what are you planning for the coming 10 years for your company? Like, are you planning to move into content generation or health sector? Because, like, you have the deep tech, which is very much required in this sector. So, what is your plan?
Right. So 10 years is a big time for a startup to think. Typically, we think more in a 3 to 5 year domain, and then look at a longer term. I think from a vision perspective, a 10-year for me is a vision. A 10-year vision is basically, or an overall vision is to transform the way people are viewing content. If you look at the space of overall, viewer experience, viewers watching content, there's so many new forms of content coming. There's so much more interactivity coming. There is virtual reality, there is immersive content, there is cloud gaming that is coming. So I do think that we want to basically enable businesses to go into these new forms of content in a much more smoother fashion, be able to bring in that next generation of viewer experience, while of course also looking at how we can help those content providers monetize. How can we, content is today, I mean, if you look at the world today, content is almost like the new oil, right? I mean, it's everywhere. Video streaming is everywhere. There's a statistic which I was wowed by, that in 2020 every minute 17,000 hours of content is being streamed through the internet. So imagine the amount of video and voice and content going through, and that's only going to increase. The next billion is going to come online. So how do you A, make the world ready for that, and B, also bring in the new, more disruptive, innovative forms of viewer experiences, is what we are looking at in the next 10 years.
Aditi, now next question moves around people. Now, you are the youngest one among all your founders, and there's a significant age difference.
Yes.
And you have I'm sure there must be some older people than you, and there must be some younger people than you in your team. So how do you manage some very tight situation when the difference of opinion is there? How do you build consensus?
Right. Yeah. So very true. I am the youngest person in the founding team, and also one of the younger people in the team overall. I think for me, one thing that I always keep in mind is, for me, it's all a learning experience. So even if I'm working with someone who in some ways is a colleague or is working for me and maybe more experienced than me, I'm always very respectful of the experience they bring in, the knowledge they bring in from the years of work that they have put into the industry. So I always try to be respectful, but I also always try to be very fact-based to if there is a difference of opinion, for example, I try to be as structured and fact-based in my thought process, because at the end of the day, we are all trying to go towards the common goal. So it's not a, me versus somebody else. It's all about, and that's a great thing about our team. We are all focused towards problem solving. We are always trying to solve, the right problems. We're trying to always be very focused on what is the best thing to do to solve this problem. So it becomes much more easy. I think the team also has been amazing. There isn't any sort of hierarchy or any, differences that you face because somebody is much more experienced in age than you. I think everybody is also very respectful towards each other. Typically, that's the way we do it. So we are very problem focused, or rather problem solving focused. And we come together and try to make sure each one of us brings a unique set of skills. For example, what I bring in is the customer understanding. So I'm always the voice of customer in a conversation. And we are very transparent, very brutal if needed, with respect to whether we're solving the right problems for the customer or not. And everybody's okay with that. I think that really helps. And for me also, of course, it's been a learning experience, how to manage stakeholders, not just externally, customers, but also internally. While getting the best possible outcome. I think for me, that has been a great learning in the last 1.5 years. But I think my team has been amazing. So it's been a smooth ride that way.
Most of the people feel very secure when they're working in a job. So did you have any doubts or confusion while you were leaving your secure job and coming for the startup to work with, or are you fixated for the startup from beginning itself?
So even from the time I was in IIT, there's always a startup bug that many of us have. Many of us, I did not, but a lot of my friends started small ventures even in college. They wanted to get a feel of entrepreneurship, a feel of, many of us were part of the entrepreneurship development cell. We interacted a lot with entrepreneurs from the time we were in college. So I always, of course, had a startup bug in me. Having said that, I think what excited me always is problem solving. So trying to solve tough problems and trying to get into uncertain territories and figure out value in that. So I think for me, it's never been, corporate versus, hey, startup. It's always been about what excites me. Where is a place where I can really add value? I can build something exponential, which is why in the first place, even when I joined Tata Sons, the idea was what kind of impact can I bring? And how can I learn, right? So those are the two key things for me. So even when we decided to start the company, for me, those were the key requirements. And I already knew the founders, right? So I'd worked with them before. So that gave me a lot of confidence and a lot of comfort that I'm going to get into this unknown, uncharted territory with people I've worked with people who are friends and I'm comfortable with. I think that gave me a lot of comfort. So I did not really have a very big conundrum, but of course it's always there when you when you decide to jump out of a secure, very very satisfying corporate job. It's always difficult. So when I decided to start my company, at that time I was actually briefly working in a fantastic company called Roche Pharmaceuticals. So Roche is a Swiss pharma company. Amazing company, great team, great people. So it was very difficult for me because to leave that team, to leave those people, even though I was there for a short time, was very painful for me. But I knew that if I did not start the company, if I did not do this right now, I would regret the rest of my life, because sometimes it's all about not regretting jumping into something new, right? So for me, that was a thought process at that point of time, and I haven't regretted. While I still miss all my team members that were there in Roche, all my team members in Tata as well. But I think I don't regret the decision, and I think it's been what I've learned in 1.5 years. I wouldn't have expected to learn in many years probably. I think that's been the greatest part about my startup journey.
I have a question for you. What inspired the idea of building something as innovative as Fovea Stream? I hope I'm pronouncing the name right.
Yes, absolutely. You're pronouncing it right. So like I said, we looked at it in two ways. We tried to understand what are the important macro trends that are happening, right? And this was not just with secondary research. We have been in the tech and innovation domain for a while. So we could understand that the next wave that was coming in media entertainment is going to be fueled by macro trends such as 5G coming in, edge devices becoming more and more powerful. So today, a lot of us at least, have 4K television sets. We have very, very powerful mobile phones where we're watching content, and then there is so much scope that which that brings in. These trends bring in a lot of scope for the next generation of content. The next wave of people coming online. The next 500 million, for example, in India, will start watching video. Will move away from broadcast, will just come to video out of nowhere. They would probably have been radio people who will now start watching video, right? So there's a lot of new market opportunity, and there is a lot of value that edge AI or on-device AI, so AI that runs on device, can bring. So that's how we started looking at it, and then we spent a lot of time. We spent a few months just talking to, understanding from the content players, the OTT players, on what are the challenges they face. So it is a combination of understanding the market and understanding, what new technology can bring in, and that's how we sort of stumbled upon. The stumbling upon was a culmination of a lot of work, but eventually we realized that this is an area where we can build something unique, and we can add a value which can disrupt the way the market is looking at video today.
So which are some of the trends that you expect to emerge with the onset of pandemic?
Right. I think the biggest one is a lot more people coming online, right? I mean, this was bound to happen, but I think the pandemic accelerated it quite a lot. And while I think overall the OTT, the video conferencing industry has done a great job in accommodating for the sudden surge of people online, but there are still challenges, right? There's still challenges. Every call that I get on, at least there'll be once that I have to make sure that my voice is audible or my video is visible and so on and so forth, right? So there's always a joke going around that at least 20% of a meeting is about, can you hear me? Can you see me? Am I audible, right? Similarly, even for, when you're watching content, there's so, especially when you're traveling, when you're, when you're in lower network areas, when you're sort of in uncertain areas, there's always a lot of issues that we face, right? So I think the pandemic has also made those things very clear, that there are these glaring issues that exist, and it's prepping the world for the next 500 million or 1 billion people who are coming on board, right? These are the kind of issues that will come. How are you going to tackle those? It's almost like a proof of concept of that, right? Everything suddenly, so many more people online has resulted in that. I think that's one of the important trends for us, especially, that we are seeing with the pandemic sort of coming in suddenly and disrupting people's lives.
Which industries do you think are the fastest to adopt AI or ML with smooth efficiency? And what are the new emerging markets for these technologies?
Well, I think right now, AI ML in multiple formats has been adopted in almost all key industries. Of course, artificial intelligence is not new. It's existed for a long, long time. It is just that, the ability to handle big data, the ability to handle a lot more data, the ability to handle unstructured data. So when I say unstructured data, I mean video, voice, sensor data with IoT coming in, right? So it's all interrelated. I think right now it's again at a new cusp of looking at artificial intelligence for unstructured data. So artificial intelligence overall has been adopted by most industries, but artificial intelligence for video voice data, artificial intelligence for sensor data, and artificial intelligence on the edge device is something that is now gaining a lot of traction. Depending on the needs, of course, there'll be different industries adopting it in different ways. But I think, as always, let's say the electronics industry is very fast in picking it up. As always, it is one of the fastest moving industries, right? Because there's a lot of demand also. It's very fast changing, fast moving, very, very innovative. So if you look at, for example, the Qualcomms of the world, they're already building chipsets that are enabled, AI enabled, that are enabling very complex AI operations to happen on the device, which didn't happen before. That is just one example. There'll be a lot more examples of industries where AI is being used in multiple ways. But I do think that unstructured data AI and AI for edge devices is something that is sort of the new wave that is coming in, and this will also be married to technologies such as virtual reality and augmented reality and extended reality. Right? There's more and more need, and there's more and more demand for these technologies, and AI will only help accelerate these technologies to market. For example, if you really want an immersive experience, an immersive virtual reality or augmented reality experience, the demand on the bandwidth to enable that real time is going to be very, very high. So that's where, again, for example, AI-enabled streaming can reduce some of those demands. AI-enabled operations. For example, we have also some work we are doing in the industrial space, where we are partnering with virtual reality players to provide, let's say, automated operations, automated maintenance, monitoring using virtual reality headsets, right? So the next generation would be a combination. It won't be one technology alone. It's going to be a combination, and each technology would fuel the other one. Each technology will help accelerate the other one. And, that's how the next wave of sort of revolution will come.
Which were the 3 biggest challenges that you faced during your entrepreneurial journey? And what are the key takeaways or learnings from that?
3. Okay, so I'll have to think out loud. There are a lot of challenges you face in your entrepreneurial journey. I think the first one is just understanding the customer, understanding what exactly is the customer challenge and what are you solving. I think it's a very difficult problem statement. Just like, in case of Ford, you might have heard the very famous quote that if Ford would have gone and asked people what they want, they would have said they want a faster horse. They wouldn't have dreamt of a car, right? They wouldn't have dreamt of a motor vehicle. So often what happens is, getting to understand what is the customer challenge and what is it exactly that you're solving for the customer is a very, very tough challenge, especially if you're building a new technology, especially if you're building an innovative product. because the customers may not have all the answers right away, right? So how do you find out the actual challenges? How do you know that you're solving for the right challenges? Is a very, very tough problem for an early stage startup. The second I would say is always building credibility, especially true. I think it's true for all kinds of startup. It's looked at differently. If you're a B2C startup, the credibility you have to build is by getting the trust of your end users. Will they trust your brand? Will they trust, for example, for a food company, will they trust that your food is not adulterated, that your food is something that is safe? Imagine somebody selling baby products. If it is a new startup that is selling baby products, an end user putting that trust that this is not going to damage their baby's health, is not going to compromise on their immunity or their health, is a very big credibility to build. Of course, there are regulatory things there that can help build some of the credibility, but it's always there. Similarly, for a B2B, it's about how do you build that credibility? How do you build that network? How do you get noticed? How do you actually get those CXOs, those decision makers to give you their time, listen to you, work with you so that you can add value? I think that's the second one. The third would be to build the right team, especially in an early stage, because that's where it is not just about the skill set that the team is bringing in. It's also about the culture that is being built. It's very, very important, because you might have again heard about the very famous line that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? It is, and this is a learning not just from my startup days, but also from my earlier experiences in corporate. I think it's so important to build the right culture because it's the way I look at it is it's not just about theoretically just saying that this is what our culture is, or these are what our values are. Your employees are going to spend 60-70% of their waking hours at least working with you, right? So you really need the right kind of culture to grow a company in the right direction, especially when you may have to do so many pivots. You may have to do, be so agile. If you don't have the right culture, if your employees are not ready to, build that culture along with you, that'll be a big problem. So I think team, hiring, culture, building all of that is one of the challenges. I wouldn't call it a challenge. I think it's just an important thing that somebody needs to keep in mind. If you don't keep it in mind from the beginning, it's very difficult to change it later. So you have to always, when you hire, when you train, when you retain employees, you always have to keep in mind how that is building the culture for your company.
Aditi, this punchline is from my generation. So now this has passed on to your generation. So now you need to give me a solution that how do we ensure that culture doesn't eat strategy for a breakfast?
Well, that's $1 million question. I think the way I look at it is, I think a part of strategy has to be, people strategy, right? While business strategy is about how do you build value, how do you build enterprise value, how do you, if you're spending 100 rupees, how do you bring 1,000 rupees home, right? But I think when we talk about strategy overall, we have to look at people strategy as well. And hence human resources, HR, is such an important part of overall company strategy and team building, right? It's so important to build the right human resource plan, to have the right kind of people on board for human resource, right? To also make sure that from the beginning. So for example, for us, when we started off, we, you start small. So we did not have an HR person in the beginning. So all of us played that role, right? In multiple ways of being sort of the HR manager or the HR partner for our employees, helping them in the beginning, making sure that we have thought through the employee journey. What is the employee going to be going through? How is this journey going to help them as much as it's going to help us? So I think the answer to your question, the way I would look at it is, I don't think culture and strategy are two completely disjointed things. I think culture is built by the right people strategy. So it's important when we look at strategy overall for a company to also look at people strategy.
So which are other areas which excites you, where you would like to be a founder or a co-founder?
Okay. Oh, interestingly, I always want to be associated with food. I'm a big foodie. So maybe someday, I want to have a food venture of my own, whether it is a venture where we sell something really delicious which makes people happy, or it is a venture where maybe it's a small restaurant or a bakery. At some point in my life, I do want to be associated with food in some way or the other. So I think that's something else I would want to do in my life. I don't know whether it'll be in the format of a full-scale startup or it'll just be something which is a bit of a hobby. That I want to do. But me and my husband we are big foodies. We're very excited about food. So I think that's something that at some point I would want to do in addition to this.
Okay.
Yes.
So AI is a huge domain and it has an immense potential.
Yes.
So which are the problems you think which require immediate attention where you can really build in value around it?
Right. So I think within AI itself, there is a lot of value and potential around industrial applications. I think there is a scope for disrupting and automating the whole industrial domain, which I think is very exciting. We even at Mylin, it was more of a pull. We got a pull from a lot of industrial players for some of the use cases that we have today for M&E, whether there can be certain applications there. So I think that's an area where a confluence of IoT and artificial intelligence will disrupt the way industrial automation happens. While of course it has been happening in some way or the other for a long time, I think the fact that even your sensors, even your edge sensors are becoming more intelligent. There is an ability to use edge sensors to more intelligently give insights real time. So for example, let's say you have a sensor that is on a very expensive machine. Today, it is sending information to the cloud where it is being processed and certain insights are given to the supervisor. In certain cases, you need more quick proactive action. So can there be certain operations that can be done on the edge? Can there be more proactive, more real-time insights or actions that can be taken on the edge of the sensor itself, rather than all of this information coming back and forth from the cloud, right? This can result in disruptively better predictive maintenance, very, very effective monitoring, very, very effective maintenance. So I think that is an area, I know it overall sounds like a very vast area, but I think that's one domain where a combination of IoT and AI will disrupt the way industries function. Of course, there is also robotics. I just wanted to mention here, so when we were working with Harvard University, there was a very interesting project we were working on there with certain researchers there, which was on the next generation of robotics, which is basically called soft robotics. What is soft robotics? This is basically, if you look at a robotic hand today, right? It's made of actuators and metal. So while it can do a lot of activities, it is not dexterous, right? Like the human hand, right? The way we can pick up a very heavy tool, but we can also pick up a very soft fruit, right? We have a dexterity. The way human beings have evolved to do that actually enables us to do certain things differently, right? Versus anybody else, any other animals in the animal kingdom. While robotics has tried to mimic a lot of the human, mechanic activities, what it hasn't been able to do is the dexterity of humans. For example, if you want a robot to be able to pick fruits without harming the fruit itself, right? Pick strawberries, pick mangoes, as just an example, right? So that's where the next wave of robotics is going, which is very exciting. The ability to use soft materials without actually having mechanical actuators, but using air and water, hydraulic pneumatic actuators, right? Where you're basically using air or a liquid to create a robot hand, which works like a human hand, is something which will bring in the next wave of robotics, which I think is another area which is very exciting. So if I ever get to do something in that area, work in that area, would be super exciting, because I think it'll open a huge new domain of what can robots do for us, going beyond just certain tasks that they do today in the industry assembly line. I think there's a lot more things that robots will be able to do going forward in the future. So that's another area that excites me quite a lot.
So this is a question about you. Being responsible for a company can often be stressful. So what do you do for rejuvenation?
So one entity that completely takes away all my stress is my dog. So I have a very cute 3-4-year-old dog that we adopted about a year and a half back. I think spending time with him is an absolute stress buster. I love traveling. Of course, in the current COVID scenario, none of us have had that luxury of travel, but travel is another thing that I do quite often. Whenever I get a chance, me and my husband will just go off somewhere because we are absolute travel bugs and food bugs, so we like to do that. I also love reading. I think it really takes you away from the regular stress, the regular humdrum of life, but also it brings a new perspective. Every time I read something, it really changes my view of of a particular, even some problem I'm facing at work. It really changes my view. I do a combination of books, but also a lot of Medium articles, Quora articles, because that gives me a perspective of what people are talking about. I absolutely love reading up psychology articles on Medium. I'm a big psychology buff, so I love to understand human psychology. I love to understand behavioral economics. How does the human mind work, and how does that actually translate into business, economy, so many different things, right? So I think all of those things excite me, and I try to kind of rejuvenate by switching myself off. Especially on weekends, I try to switch myself off and sort of do some of these activities that I like doing.
What is your revenue model? Like, how do you acquisition cost? How do you make money here? Okay.
Right. So we are actually, we are a B2B company. We are an enterprise B2B company. Our customers currently are, any players that are video streaming, right? So let's say OTT players, over-the-top video on-demand players, anybody who is live streaming, any player that does live streaming of sports content or any kind of content which is live streamed, video conferencing players. So anybody who is sending content over the internet, any player that is doing that is a customer for us. Currently, we are targeting the the larger scale players who have at least a few million active users every month, because they face the bigger issues of scale and monetization, which we are trying to help solve. Our business model in terms of pricing right now is on, for certain offerings, it is on a per user basis. So for per end user that we are servicing, there is a cost. In certain cases, it is on the basis of what we are saving as a cost for them. So let's say if we are saving a lot of their streaming costs, we are taking a percentage of that. So it's a different pricing model depending on what the offering is. In terms of our costs, primarily because we are a deep tech company, we have a lot of product development cost. We have our team, 80% of our team consists of technical people. So we have product engineers, we have technology leaders. So the cost of building the product is one of the bigger costs. And then of course, being an enterprise B2B, there's a lot of cost in also building the right enterprise relationships and kind of the sales and marketing, business development costs. Primarily, those are the key costs. Of course, the model itself is evolving because we are just about a year and a half old, and we are currently in the mode of sort of testing out, piloting in India and then going international. Some of these will pivot depending on what is the industry's ask. Right? There's also a buyer's power, right? So if these are very big players, in some cases they have a say on what works for them and what doesn't. So it's an evolving model, but primarily that's how we're looking at the world of media entertainment.
How many months you recover this money? Let's say acquisition cost. One, right. Definitely the product cost is there. What will be the acquisition cost, let's say, and how many months do you recover?
So our typical product development cycles are longer because it's a deep tech and it's a new product. So typically at least 9 to 12 months for developing a full-scale product which can be deployed, which let's say will at least be about $1 million in cost, considering everything. Because again, it's not just the technology cost; the people cost is high because we need very experienced, very focused people in that domain to be able to build those products. Typically, we see that about 8 to 10 customers, we will be able to we'll be able to recover that product cost. But after that, the maintenance cost is low. because once the development happens, the updation maintenance is not a very high cost for us. We are of course looking at a more SaaS-based model going forward, because that will work better than just direct sales and very focused enterprise B2B. So once we are trying to figure out the nitty-gritty of how a SaaS model should work for us. But to answer your question, a typical product development will be a 9 to 12 months, and we'll need about 8 to 10 customers to be able to break even the product development cost, if you may put it that way.
So what advice would you like to give to budding entrepreneurs?
I think one advice I have is, if you really have that itch to start something new, you should do it, because there is no right time. When I decided to start up, I had a lot of my friends, well-wishers, who actually were thinking about my own benefit, right? They were not, they're thinking about how this will impact me. And they were telling me, are you sure? Maybe this is too early. Maybe you should work for a few more years and then start up. Maybe you should, think about it 5 years down the line. At that time, although I completely respected their opinion, where they were coming from, I just thought that, when is the right time? I mean, is the right time 5 years later? Is the right time 5 years earlier? Because there are people who start fresh out of college as well, right? There are people who start, in their late 50s. There are people. So I don't think there's any right or wrong time to start up. So if somebody is feeling very strongly, you should give it a shot. However, you should think through all the options. You should go in realistically, right? Don't go in with, the assumption that your startup will definitely succeed. Be ready to also embrace failure. So basically, hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst. It can happen that your startup might not work out. It may not be because of you. It may not be because of your team. It can be because of various other reasons. So as long as you have that maturity in your head, I think you should go ahead and start up. I also think that it is very important to have the buy-in of your family when you're starting up. Especially because, there will be stressful times. There will be times when, you absolutely need your family's support. You need them to understand. You need them to be there for you. So I think it's really important to get your family's buy-in, to get your close friends' buy-in. Of course, even if they don't, it may be okay sometimes to go ahead. But I'm just saying you need a support system when you're starting up. It's very important to have a support system. And I think many people, of course, like to start up solo, which is also great. But I think for me, the biggest strength was that I was starting up with people that I know very well, people who are friends, people who have my back. I think that made a lot of difference. So if you have, I think you have people who you can trust, who you are very good working with, and they can start up with you. I think it's amazing. Then you should just go for it.
Which are your top 3 priorities among idea, capital, people, team, product, domain, place?
I don't think there's any right or wrong answer though. It can be, there are startups that start purely on the basis of, just having an idea and scaling it up. There are startups where it's a bird in hand principle, where they look at something, they start small and then it grows, right? They're organic startups. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. For me personally, it started off with the team. I have worked with these folks before. I had absolute confidence that, I can go into this journey with them, and of course, there are ideas around what we wanted to do as well. But the priority for me was the team.
There are OTT players, Netflix, Prime Video, Hotstars, and let's say G5. One is very high cost, 650. Another is 99. Pricing. What do you think? Whose future is better?
So I think both the models will exist because there is a market for both. There's going to be a growing market for premiumization as well. There'll be more and more people who are looking for premium content. So somebody like a Netflix, will not become invalid. However, even a Netflix, for example, is now looking at models to cater to the Indian market. So Netflix, for example, has come up with a lower end pricing model, right? Which is supposed to be for mobile plan, which is only standard definition. So while the majority of India will continue being, I think, more advertising focused, the people will not want to pay. They want to watch the content for free. They're ready to get advertisements in between, right? But there will still be niches of subscription-based players that will also come, because as India gets more premium, right, there are more and more people who will be looking for premium services. So I think both models will exist. However, I do think that there's going to be a consolidation that will happen. I don't mean between a Netflix and a Hotstar necessarily, But I think a lot of these smaller players will consolidate. Some of the bigger players will buy them out, and it'll, because right now it's a very, very fragmented market. So I don't think, at least my understanding is that some amount of consolidation will happen. Otherwise, it will become a problem of plenty. There are too many OTT players today, and even end users are sometimes confused. If I want to watch one content, I go to one player and then I again switch to another one. So there's a bit of that issue that is there for end users. So I think there'll be a lot of consolidation, and in players like Jio coming in, which are more end-to-end, right? Jio is an end-to-end player. They will also look at the whole world of OTT differently, and they'll also help in some of these consolidations happening.
Do you think there will be aggregator in the future?
I think an aggregator is also a possibility. In fact, there are some players in the market who are trying to do that already. There is a player called OTT company called MX Player. You might have heard about them.
Yeah.
MX Player is also to a great extent trying to aggregate, a lot of content from multiple OTT channels and bringing it together. So that is also another place. So I think the jury is still out, whether it's going to be an aggregator which will come in and bring all of these together, whether it's going to be a bunch of mergers and acquisitions. But I think all of these possibilities are out there.
So Aditi, what inspires you on the socio-economic problem side, like which can be solved through AI?
So, well, this is a question that needs some thought. I do think that artificial intelligence as a technology, artificial intelligence is an enabler for anything that is happening. It is not a standalone technology. It is not a panacea. Which is the way a lot of times it is being projected in the world, that AI is going to be the panacea that's going to it's going to solve all of world's problems. All global hunger will get solved by AI, which is not the case. AI is an enabler in whatever is happening. So in all of the spaces, I think, even in the space of, let's say, even in the work that somebody like a United Nations is doing, artificial intelligence can help enable more, let's say, a specific customized delivery of the work that they're doing to enable, let's say, better output, right? It can help even predicting disease faster, right? But again, artificial intelligence is also, while it is a wonderful technology, it is also dependent on data. Correct. So the areas where there'll be more data, there'll be more relevant, valuable data, is where there'll be bigger impact of AI. So I think in parallel to the process of looking at AI as a solution in these areas, there also has to be a very robust, systematic, disciplined way of collecting and collating data. Correct. In the socioeconomic areas that we are thinking about, right? For AI to be relevant there.
Does agriculture interests you?
Well, it does absolutely. In fact, I was, I'm just rereading a book called *Sapiens*. You might have read the book.
Yuval Noah Harari.
Yes. So I was just reading about the whole agriculture revolution and how it happened and all of that, right? So, while it's interesting to see how humans started agriculture in the first place, I do think that agriculture, at least in India, the current productivity that we have needs to grossly increase. Correct. We really need to go towards having much higher yield than what we have today. If you compare it with the more developed countries in the world, we are at much lower yield levels. I do think that there's a lot of scope there. Not just AI, there are multiple technologies that will help. So, for example, when we were in the Tata Group, at that time, as part of the tech and innovation team, there was a very innovative project we were working on, where we were building a drone that can help in pesticide and pesticides and insecticide delivery, right? Can actually enable more, let's say, controlled delivery.
Precision farming and all that stuff, yeah.
Precision agriculture, absolutely. So I think there's a lot of different technologies, not just AI. AI will aid some of these, right? So AI will be the enabling technology in all of these. But I do think the next wave of agricultural revolution is technology. And what can technology do in enabling more yield? I think that's the biggest thing. More yield, healthier food, while organic is a trend now, but how do you enable at scale? Because sometimes organic is not scalable, right? Because of the challenges. So I think that's where technology will play a role.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aditi.
Great speaking to all of you.
Yeah.
Great interaction, and I would love to be connected in the future also.